Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back. My name is Lukas Okialakon. I'm the director for development with United World Wrestling. I say my surname so that at least one person pronounce it right in Switzerland. You're very welcome to this panel on women and sport. As part of our Super 8 campaign, we thought it was a great opportunity to look at this very interesting area and issue. And we're joined on the stage here by four very prestigious guests. We have Sofia Mattsson, who you will see upstairs in the exhibition. Sofia is an active athlete from Sweden, has competed at the Olympic Games, I think twice already, and was very heavily involved in the inception of the idea. Carol, you had introduced you earlier on during the draw, and Carol is very active in our Athletes Commission, and we've talked a lot about this area as well, specifically how we can improve. Miss Claudia Bockel, I say she needs no introduction, but just in case. Claudia is the chair of the IOC Athletes Commission and very active at the executive board level, and also somebody that we've kind of looked to for advice and inspiration. And finally, you have another Canadian. It's kind of a 50% Canadian representation throughout the day. I don't know what's going on, but Lindsay Glasgow is the Director for International Cooperation and Development at the IOC. She will celebrate 1 year in her job tomorrow, so she's relatively new to the role, but has a lot to contribute. So the way that we're going to work it, we're going to have some open-ended questions for our panelists. Then we'll do a little summary of that, and we would welcome questions from the audience at the end. If you have a question, what we'll do, we'll just get a microphone to you, just get your hand up, and that's the way that we're going to do it. So, Sofia, starting with you, we talked a lot about this Super 8 campaign. How did this whole idea come about, and what was the background to it?
Well, I was with the UWW and got to attend the Women in Sport conference, and I think that's when the idea was born. And their slogan was kind of lead the change, be the change. And we felt that even though a lot of things are changing in the UWW for women's wrestling, that we can do something. We don't have to sit and wait for the change. We need to do and be the change and lead the change ourselves.
Okay, very good. And while we were there, I remember us being split up and we were going to different panels and things. Was there anything in particular that kind of caught your eye that you were interested in while you were there?
Yeah, many of the athletes talked about that they haven't had a female coach during their career, and yeah, I would recognize myself in that position too. And also for me, wrestling has always been about being an athlete, and being there really opened my eyes that you can do so much more in sport than just being an athlete, and there are things to do even when you stop wrestling.
Very good. Carol, just moving on to you, we talked a little bit about, you know, making the changes happen, leading the change and being the change. And what is the sport of wrestling and United World Wrestling, what have they done to kind of to embrace this issue of, you know, addressing the issue of gender equality?
Yeah, great question. Since the big scare of having wrestling out of the Olympics, it was actually a real, it forced FILA to do a lot of changes.
Okay, I have to stop you. You have to pay a fine. There's a fine system. When you use that name, you buy everybody one beer. So.
But I used that because it was FILA at the time.
Okay, we'll let it slide. We'll let it slide this one time. But I know that our marketing guys are up here saying no, you can't use that. So we bought a lot of beer. I can tell you. Yeah. So.
No doubt. Okay, well, with United World Wrestling, there have been a lot of changes with regard to gender equity. Some changes to the Constitution, governance. Within our bureau, there are now an increased number of members that are female, and also we have to have at least one vice president that is female, and we've done that already this year. We elected a new female member, and we also elected a new vice president who is a female. So a lot of changes are happening in there. Other changes that I think a lot of the athletes are really interested in is that the increase in Olympic weight classes. We've gone from 4 to 6 now, so we'll see 6 in Rio, which is really encouraging. There's also, we have to consider that all these changes that are happening are going to take time, and I think there are a lot of things such as having a Women in Sport Commission added to governance in United World Wrestling is fantastic. And I think one of the things that they're working on is being able to identify future leaders, those the next generation of women leaders. I'm considering that women's wrestling is relatively new in this sport. It's important to know that that we're still we need time to develop those women leaders that can take those spots in governance on the bureau.
And on that, I mean, like you yourself, we talked about presenting in Buenos Aires. It's such an important time, and kind of maybe being encouraged into a leadership role. Were you pushed, or you were encouraged, or how did that come about?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
A little encouragement and maybe a lot of pushing too. But I think it was great because it really forced me to look at the sport in a different way and see the outside. Like Sophia said, as an athlete, you're kind of just focus on being an athlete and the training and competition. We don't really think about how our sport is run. So it was great for me to kind of be pushed into that world and kind of see how our sport is run, and also now how we can make positive changes, including making those steps towards gender equity.
Very good, and that's probably a nice connection to the question I wanted to ask to Claudia, because you're somebody who holds quite senior leadership and decision-making roles in the Olympic movement. I mean, for you also, I mean, how did that come about? How was the process for you to get in there, and what have you kind of learned now that you've gone from being an athlete who's just concerned with competing to being on the inside and looking at it, and what have you learned in that time, and how challenging was it to get there?
I think one of the major learnings there was if my event, which is Women's Epee, wouldn't have been an Olympic event in Atlanta in '96 for the first time, I wouldn't be an Olympian, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity to sit here and to serve on the executive board. So having my event being an Olympic event is one of the major stones of my career in what I do now. Other than that, I come from athletes commissions. To me, athletes commissions usually are quite good in gender equity. So for me, it has never been a major issue, because I had 50% athlete representation in my athletes commission in Germany. Within the European Olympic Committee, with athletes commission that I chaired, there was about 50%. And then in the IOC Athletes Commission, it's about the same. And then you look when you are at certain board meetings, and then you see that it is not the case everywhere, and then you think, well, why is it not? And I think that's one of the learnings, that out of the athletes, out of the younger people, that you can develop and you can become a sports leader. And for me, I've always been encouraged. I needed, obviously, the support from a lot of people, and I needed to have the role models and to see that women can hold those positions, and that they're being heard, and that they're as valuable as the men, and having the combination of men and women is extremely important. And through that, I mean, I'm a fencer with a silver medalist from Athens. Okay, the fencing community knows me, but standing for elections in Beijing, having all the athletes vote for me, or not all of them, but enough to have me elected, I think also shows to the athletes around the world that it is worth to speak up about the issues that concern you as an athlete, and then I hope to also be a role model for younger athletes, but also to younger men, that it is worth being involved in your sport and worth to take up the positions.
And for that as well, I mean, you touched on some key things there, election process, things like probably very new to you coming from your athlete career and going into this. I mean, were there people advising you on the way and saying, you know, Claudia, you need to play it like this, and you know, it's quite a political world when you get there, but you've managed to be very successful in those roles, and kind of wondering what factors were at play. You know, were there people helping you, and how did you learn? You know.
I always try to focus on the content. Representing athletes means that you have to know what the athletes want, what they need, and something that we discussed this morning as well at wrestling competitions. I mean, what is it that makes a successful wrestling competition? And you need to have the athletes' voice in that. And if I represent athletes on the IOC executive board, and the president asked me, what is the athlete's opinion on this, I cannot only say my own opinion, I need to know what the opinion of the athletes is. Therefore, we have an International Athletes Forum every 2 years with all the different representatives from the different federations, WADA Athlete Committee, IPC Athletes Council, the Continental Association. So for me, everything based on content. And then it might be as political as you wish, and sometimes you win some and sometimes you lose some. But if it is the content, and if you know this is really something that is worth representing, and you are sure about that content, you can get up to the IOC executive board, and that's what I try to stay out of politics. That's what Nenad, I think you mentioned it yesterday or this morning, just telling you what I think you could do better. I thought I was criticizing a bit too much, but if I look at today, I think
he loves that. He loves that.
You've done an amazing job, and
in this area.
I forgot which number of recommendation it was. I know we. Thank you. It's 11. We have 20 plus 20, 40. It's like United World Wrestling. We have to say it's 20 plus 20 recommendations, so 40 recommendations. It's recommendation 11, which says 50% participation of either gender at the games. And I think it's important, as Lindsay said, we need to have the girls, the women, to have access to all the sports and all the events.
And do either you or Lindsay, do you have any advice in terms of us as United World Wrestling, as our federation, in terms of how we could develop these leaders? If you have some comments on that. Leaders.
Yeah. Sure. Since Claudia handed it over to me, I'll start. We actually programmatically do a fair amount of training in this area. In fact, where we have workshops and training sessions for women in sport. We spend, or we encourage the sport movement to try and identify potential leaders, or leaders that are out there but not necessarily stepping forward into elections and into key positions. It's often a lack of confidence. It's often actually not even thinking that it's something that may be of interest or that they may have the ability to do. And it's simply, I won't say simply, it's not so simple, but it's often just encouraging, explaining processes, and trying to increase a number of skills that are necessary to put their names forward into the election sphere. So we do a lot of these workshops. We also do workshops with media. We feel it's important that women in sport be portrayed in a very positive light, and that there's more focus on women in sport in order to increase the interest of girls and women. I see Claudia's hand doing this, so I'll hand it over. I know you want it back.
Yeah,
so
I think it's a twitch from fencing.
I know,
yeah
exactly.
Sorry, no. And I think we heard it this morning. The athletes, what wrestling can do or does to female athletes, and I think that's the biggest asset that you have within a federation. I mean, you have a whole pool of athletes, male and female. I try to be gender equity in everything I say, but if you want to increase the female participation in leadership positions, look at the athletes that you have, and they're those are just a few great examples, and you have more. And we try to support athletes within athletes commissions. We do it also through continental forums. We encourage athletes to be part of the workshops. I think just last week there was a workshop where in Asia where one athlete per country was invited in addition to one regular participant. So through that, I think that is the most obvious way from my perspective, and not just because I represent athletes, but because I think what your sport, and I might extrapolate it to different sports as well, but in wrestling you have the scientific basis for that as well, to really what it did to your athletes, and how it socially moved them up, and then use that potential and use them within your federation, within the national federations, and in whichever way. I mean, I would like to see a wrestler or more wrestlers as candidates for the IOC Athletes Commission. Why is there not a candidate for WADA Athlete Committee? I mean, there are loads of opportunities. If I could do it as a fencer, I mean, why not a female wrestler? You want it back? Yeah.
We're now sparring. I think the obvious one, and we both haven't said it because it's probably so obvious, is mentorship. And you know, when I hear athlete, I think it's part and parcel of any strong program is having a mentorship program. Athletes who have been through the process, Claudia is a great example, are great mentors for younger athletes. So in terms of training, it doesn't have to be formal training. It can be informal partnership, buddy system, mentorship, whatever you want to call it. But I think
grassroots, I think the big piece that is makes it difficult for kids to join is that we don't have enough coaches, people who know how to wrestle or can teach wrestling. If we don't have coaches, then it's hard to have the kids, right? I think anywhere you go, you're going to have kids who want to play sport. But if you don't have anyone to teach wrestling, then you're not going to have a wrestling team. So I don't know if that means trying to recruit, you know, high school teachers or like, you know, people who did wrestling when they were kids. How do we get them to be interested in passing on their experiences to young people?
Very good. Are there?
Yeah,
You want to
I
add
have one more
something?
thing. Yeah, when you talk about schools, we had a good example about that in Sweden. We had working together with one of the school, and they actually put wrestling on their schedule, like one times a week for 3 months, and then they did it during the school time, and that actually caught a lot of girls. And after that period, they came down to the training hall as well.
Okay. Are there some other questions in the audience? Anybody wants to ask a question? One more, Rich? Maybe Rich? Just take Rich first and...
So this is directed probably, Claudia, to you in terms of kind of understanding the philosophy of the IOC in terms of gender equity. Obviously, the Women's Sport Committee has a focus of 50% participation by women and males. And you know, I think one of the challenges that many sports face is when you bump up against that 10,500 athlete number, that ultimately, I think President Rogue said it pretty well, that the bus is full. And before anyone is going to get on, somebody has to get off. And I think sports many times become conflicted, right? Because you have a male-dominated sport that is looking at it like providing opportunity for women is going
to... never make that criticism personal, but if you are trying to help someone and to make things better, and for me, I try to stay out of politics. I probably, over the years, became a little more political, but in the end, if what I say is based on the knowledge, it's what the athletes want, it's what the athletes need, I think it's relatively easy.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you for another question in just a moment, but I'd like to bring Lindsay in just to talk a little bit about the role that you occupy as a director. I mean, you're working with the Women in Sport Commissions and these. Can you just share a little bit about what's going on the Olympic movement in terms of these commissions and the work that they do?
Sure. So, as the Director of International Cooperation and Development, we're focused on a number of areas where sport is used for social change, but women in sport is one of our primary areas of focus. We oversee the Women in Sport Commission, and they've had a strategy in place since 1995, and it's been a threefold strategy. And the first pillar of the strategy is all around participation in the games themselves. The target since 2005 has been 50% women's participation in the games. And believe it or not, we're still not there. The highest we've reached was actually at the London Games, where we had 40% participation, or 44% participation. No, 44% participation rate. But we actually dropped down in Sochi to 40%. And that took place for a variety of reasons. So as a commission, we're continuously trying to push for that 50% rate. The second area of emphasis for the commission is around leadership. We feel it's incredibly important for women to be in decision-making positions within sport administration. And we have a variety of initiatives, which I can speak to perhaps maybe a little bit later, that we focus on to really try and ensure that women are in leadership positions, not just at the decision-making level, but also coaching, refereeing, volunteering. I mean, any area of sport administration, we feel it's important for women's involvement. And then the third area is just general equality in sport, empowering women through sport, ensuring girls' participation globally, and trying to increase access. So as you're all aware, there are still many countries in the world where girls do not have the equal right to participate in sport. They certainly do not have access or opportunity. And it's simply just culturally unacceptable still in many countries. So we play a large advocacy role. We use a number of different platforms, including our position as permanent observer of the UN. So we go to meetings such as the Commission on the Status of Women, and continuously push for stressing the importance and the value of sport for the equality of women. Sport is an incredible tool on the youth development front, on the inclusion front. I mean, we all know how it can contribute to health, and we know how it can contribute to education. But I think what's often left out of the discussion is how it can contribute to the empowerment of girls and to women. And there's a huge amount of research there. So on the advocacy front, we spend a lot of time speaking about these issues. And I guess I'll just wrap it up by saying I'm really, really pleased to be here and to have participated in the Women in Sport Commission this morning, because I feel that the Federation is on the right path and has made huge inroads. When I look at what you've done over the last year, I really want to congratulate you, because I think it's actually hats off to all of you that you've achieved what you have in this past year.
That kind of brings me back to maybe a point with Claudia, because sometimes when you go to these conferences, as you know, we were down in Finland together, you get bombarded with information. You have to do this, you have to do that, and sometimes there's a lot of conflicting studies, and sometimes you don't know where to go. But in terms of Agenda 2020, the information that's filtered in now to Agenda 2020, how does this kind of affect this area of gender equality? What's the vision for Agenda 2020?
Getting the advice from those who have been through it and who have words of wisdom, of best practices, lessons learned, and the do's and the not to do's is incredibly helpful for people who are just thinking about it.
Excellent. So that gives you kind of a picture from, let's say, an IOC international perspective. Carol, talking about your own experience in Canada, your national federation, everywhere I go, there's Canadians. When we're talking gender equity, they're everywhere. Our researchers, our federation, they've done a really fantastic job. And, in the Canadian experience, was there anything in particular that your national federation did to help you, to kind of nudge you in that direction of a leadership role? And do you kind of see how it might be possible for you to mentor people in the future? Because I know you're very wise, but You know, do you have those kind of ideas for the future yourself as well?
Well, I definitely had a lot of help, and having a mentor or mentors was great, and I don't think I would have been able to do it without that kind of help. I had actually, Tamara up there is our executive director of Canada Wrestling, and she's been a lot of help. She still is. Thank goodness for Tamara. But yeah, I was definitely encouraged to take leadership role with our committee to help save wrestling. I was kind of placed into a position where I could be a figurehead, but also learn the ropes. Like I did some traveling with Tamara and Don Ryan, the president of Canada Wrestling, and got to meet a lot of the major players and that sort of thing, and see how things work. And like I said before, like I had no idea as an athlete. I was not concerned with how things worked. I was just concerned with training and competing. I think that Canada, I think that we really wanted to try to do as much as we could with the resources that we had to support United World Wrestling and everyone else who was a part of the whole campaign to save Olympic wrestling. And I'm very proud of what we did do and what we accomplished in the end. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
That's great, and it actually leads quite nicely, probably, to Sophia, who's been waiting very patiently at the end here. But when we were in Finland, we looked at this idea of Super 8. It started to be an idea in our head, and I think it was kind of the production of all of this research we came up with at the end. Okay, we need leaders, we need mentors, we need these people. And you know, one of the things that struck me was when I spoke to you, I said, who's your inspiration, or who are the people that you look up to? And you said, well, actually it's one of my competitors. It was, I think, Tonya Verbeek at the time. We mentioned, and we talk about her as one of them. And the difficulty of being such a young sport and saying to your direct competitor, you know, I really look up to you now, let's go wrestle, and please don't win. You know, can you talk a little bit about, you know, in Sweden as well, you know, you've had probably different mentors, you know, in your career at this stage, and you know, is there people that have helped you along the way in just your role as an athlete?
Well, for me, I started wrestling really young. I was about 6 years old, and I think what you said, like wrestling on the female side, is quite young. So our first professional athletes have just retired, but for me, it was really important to have those people to look up to, and we had. For example, a world champion in Sweden, her name was Sara Eriksson, and I remembered when we talked about her during practice, and like, oh, Sara, this is what Sara do on her fights, this is what she likes to do to win. And I remember I was thinking for myself, one day I'm going to be world champion too. I want to be like Sara. So of course for me it has been really important with the role models.
And it's a great day to talk about women. We've been talking a lot about women, but let's not forget the men. There are at least one on this panel. But anyway, your coach is from Iran originally, and it's kind of an interesting connection. Have there been men in your wrestling career that kind of influenced you as well and helped you out, or even your family, parents, things like that?
Well, in my family, we are 3 sisters, so we started wrestling all at the same time, and now we are still 2 of us left, and that has helped.
The other one's still alive, by the way. She stopped wrestling. They didn't get
so difficult. And quite frankly, for women that are working and striving for it, it's exhausting, and it's been going on for years. And partially it's because we're fighting our own battle, and there are not enough men that are involved in pushing for the rights of women. And for that reason, I think it's really important that women in sport commissions are composed of men and women. I think it's really important that everything we're striving for with respect to women and training and capacity development is also provided to men. And I think that this conversation is not a conversation that should just be about women. It should be about women and men. And I think we need to really change the lens and try and look at it across the board as, really continue to question ourselves around, are we looking at this equitably? So I know that sounds all very, easy, but from my perspective, I'm one of 2 female directors at the IOC, which is the leading sport organization in the world, and we were both just hired a year ago. And currently the IOC hasn't. It's just reached, I think, 22 or 21% female representation out of membership, and we ourselves are still confronting all of these issues. And what I'm observing every day is if there were more men involved in the conversation, it would be much easier, and it wouldn't be such a difficult conversation. So I would really try and promote the participation in men in dialogue and commissions and working groups and wherever possible.
Okay, thanks very much. I think that's maybe a good jumping off point where we can involve some of those men and some of those women in the dialogue. So we're just having a look in the audience. There's a question here. Edmar will bring the microphone. And if you can just briefly introduce yourself and direct your question.
Hello, my name is Edmar Abdullayev. I'm from the Netherlands, and I'm active in the school wrestling in different schools for the children in the age of 9 and 13. And I would like to hear your advice from the athletes, what the national coaches and especially club coaches have to say to do to get especially girls into the wrestling. When they give, for example, I give wrestling shows or wrestling demonstration in the schools, and I see many talented girls between 9 and 13 of the age. But it's very difficult to get them to the wrestling. So what's your experience? What kind of magic words I have to say to girl, come to be a wrestler? Thank you.
Okay, that's probably for you, Sophia, or Carol, whichever of you wants to jump in.
Unfortunately, I just don't think there are any magical words. We have the same kind of problem in Sweden, but first of all, I think you need to change the site of wrestling. That you need to focus on wrestling being for everybody. That you can be tall, you can be short, you can just come, and it doesn't have to be so serious. It should be a lot of fun, and yeah. Unfortunately, I don't know any magical words, but yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah, I think you're probably going to find that a problem in most places. But I think in my opinion, it does have to be fun, especially for that age when you're trying to draw in kids. But it has to start at the grassroots. Like you're saying, what are our coaches doing to entice the youth to try out wrestling? But there's different levels of wrestling in each country, I'm sure. There might be elementary, there might be high school, junior high, there's clubs, there's university, there's senior. So it's all, I think in Canada, we're trying to work on making it not so separate and making it so that we're more in sync with what's going on. I mean, we have a huge country to deal with, and in the past, and we're still working on it, right, Tamara, on having everyone communicate. But when we're talking about kids like that,
Get rid of her.
Yeah, I think it was enough with 2 sisters wrestling in the family. So yeah, she's now studying, so she has her own thing going on. But we had a coach from when I was 12 years old, and he was from Iran, and he had a different kind of view on how to look on wrestling, and especially the freestyle was kind of new in Sweden. We were mostly good at Greco, and he brought the freestyle from Iran and that kind of style, and yeah, that's how he trained us.
Excellent. And Carol, as well, just bouncing back to you, in terms of the men as well in Canadian wrestling, because of course it's great Tamara supports and other people support. Have there been men along the way that have supported you a little bit?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
I know that Mr. Lalovich, of course, has been pushing you in the right direction for some time, but is there other ones?
Yeah, for sure. My entire career, I had a lot of support, and many of them were male. And my coaches have all been male. Right from high school, I had a coach that was, a women's wrestling advocate. But not only that, he just was a huge supporter of our high school wrestling program. One of those guys that just volunteered his time and even, bought a van so that we could travel our province, which is probably 15 times the size at least of Sweden. So that was really important. So, and then after that, I had, my university coach who, really believed in my abilities and my potential, and sent me here and there. And then I had my Olympic coaches that, their belief in me, in my abilities, really helped me to feel confident in myself and helped me to reach the success that I did in my career. So yeah, for sure, I had a lot of male supporters.
Oh, it's great. I don't mention it just because we feel sorry for the guys, right? It's that there is an important role to play for male advocates. We saw it in the research this morning. And just maybe Claudia and Lindsay, very quickly as a kind of final point, have you had experience of this kind of support, I guess, from men in a way as well, or at least and like Lindsay was saying, maybe not formal always, maybe it's just
I think you have to start somewhere. So I'm the first woman from Germany who is in the IOC, is an IOC member. I'm the first female chair of the IOC Athletes Commission. So obviously I had support from men for that. Without them paving the way for me, I wouldn't have had a chance. But it's now trying to pave the way for the others, and I see it in my sports. If I may take an example from fencing, as I said, our event became Olympic in Atlanta, and we didn't have a lot of female coaches. I had first a male coach, and then I switched to a female coach, and I won my silver medal in Athens with a female coach. But that was about the only one that I could choose from in Germany. And now I see that some of my former teammates, some of my opponents, that they chose to have a career in coaching. And I think that's exactly the right way. Because you need the experience from the women as well. And I would say they can pave the way for another generation, and then it will evolve from there. And I think that maybe 20 years ago you would say, oh, my male coach was better than any female coach. Yes, because he had more experience. And now I think the girls who fenced with me, Olympic champions, world champions, I think they'll be great coaches, and I'm almost tempted to try them out and to see how that would be. For me, it was never an option because I chose a different career path. But I think evolving out of the sport evolves, and then the women should evolve with that, and opening the eyes for the opportunities that are there. If it's, I don't know, journalism, a female journalist would write possibly differently about female wrestling, and all those opportunities, they will be and they should be, and they are now open for women as well, and I think that's right. But it doesn't mean that every spot now needs to be filled with a woman, because we're still looking at a 50% from either way, from my side.
Very good. Lindsay, if you just want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I think that striving for gender equality and providing girls and women equal access and opportunity to sport shouldn't be
at the expense of men who obviously, we have a pretty strong philosophy that we don't have enough representation at the Olympic Games. So what would be your advice to sport as you start to work towards that 50-50 number? I mean, to me, it seems to make sense that maybe it's a philosophical adjustment by the IOC to say maybe we need to eliminate that number to provide opportunities for women and not the expense of existing men.
Well, we can't eliminate the number because that's also one of the recommendations, that we stick to 10,500 athletes at the Games. So there are a whole bunch of recommendations also that we look from the Olympic program side, that we look at all the different events instead of the sport. So saying we don't look at a federation like United World Wrestling or the Fencing Federation to be part of the Olympic program, but we look at Greco-Roman, 73 kilos. It might not be an event, but so we look at all those events instead of at the whole federation, and then we take it from there. So we've set a total number of athletes. We've said we want 50% women, and we look at all the events and see how they are, and that's going to be a huge task also from the program commission to really look at the different events and how the composition of the Olympic program should be. My advice in any case would be that I think women should have an opportunity to choose any event and men similarly, or almost any event, women or men, that they could participate in, and obviously that will that they should be able to participate at the games as well. So if you have, it's not the case, but if you would have 30 weight classes in men and 2 in women in wrestling, I would say that's not totally right. So you would have to adjust that. If you say, I don't know, in fencing we have a similar issue. We don't have all the events on the Olympic program, so that's also something that I think is not fair from that point of view. So I would try to balance that, knowing that that's not an easy task. But on the other hand, if we ask all federations to look into it, I think that would be quite a fair process. And if we really look at all the different events that are on the Olympic program, I think you need some good arguments why, from a federation point of view, there cannot be more female events in a specific sport. And if you have the right arguments, then I think it's difficult for us to discuss it. But if you don't have the right arguments, if it's just because it's a male-dominant sport, as you stated, I don't think that's the right argument. But we cannot have more athlete participation, and we know. I know also in my sport, if you reduce the amount of athletes who are competing at the games in your event, that's not the way to do it as well. So I think we really look at it from a holistic point of view, but also very specific from an event point of view. I hope that was kind of clear.
So maybe a follow-up on that. Sure. In terms of, so obviously Greco-Roman wrestling, there's I think rightfully so, the focus of our international federation and in many of the national federations is to use women's freestyle wrestling as our focus to increase women's participation in the sport. And so my question back to you is, are you saying that potentially Greco-Roman wrestling, if there's not a women's discipline, is at risk?
I'm not a member of the program commission, so I won't say this, but I think those conversations should take place. But I'm not too much of an expert, and I've explained it this morning as well about the Greco-Roman and the freestyle. But for me, if there are good arguments why that is not female participation, then obviously the IOC could be persuaded. But I'm not in a position to say which sport is at risk. I'm happy that we had the recommendation through with the 50% female participation at the games, and I think everything will be taken from there. And first of all, we need the right evaluation of all the different events at the games. So.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. I think we're just a little bit tight on time, so I'm going to wrap us up there. Everybody who's on this panel is actually going to be around for the next hour and a half anyway, so if there was some kind of area that you wanted to talk about that you didn't have a chance, or I'm sure that they will be happy to answer your questions. I think Sophia and Carol are going to be on the mat, so don't ask them anything that makes them angry. But for Lindsay and Claudia, they should be around as well. So I'm sure they're happy to continue the discussion. Just remains for me, first of all, to thank our hosts at the Olympic Museum for allowing us to use the space and really put on this event. But while I'm here with the microphone, I would like to point out to Yona Lee, our designer, graphic designer, and her team. When you see the exhibit upstairs, they did a lot of work on this, and they're just having the chance to see the wrestlers whose faces they've been looking at for months, to see them live. But they did a fantastic job upstairs, which is where we're going to go now, up towards the exhibit. At the request of President Lalovich, we made a slight change in the program. The wrestling demonstration will start at 4:30. So we have some time to go upstairs and to see the exhibit and to walk around and just see it and enjoy it. And then at 4:30, we'll do wrestling demonstration. Anybody who wants to take part in the demo, Rich, is welcome to to slip their shoes off and come on the mat and join in. We'll just have a bit of fun with it. So it's just something fun to introduce you to some basic techniques, and our new women's development officer, Nadine Tokar, will be running that. So can we just have a round of applause for all of our panelists and thank them very much for their time. So we'll go upstairs to the exhibit, and we'll see you on the floor where we had lunch at 4:30 for the wrestling demo. Thank you.